And Joseph, help us do a good job today.
Amen.
Amen.
What's stopping you from becoming a Catholic?
Why can't women become priests?
1-833-288-EWTN.
I don't understand why I have to earn salvation.
1-833-288-3986.
Why do I need to confess my sins to a priest?
What's stopping you? This is Called to Communion with Dr. David Anders on the EWTN Global Catholic Radio Network.
Welcome to Call to Communion. I'm your host, David Anders. The number to be on Call to Communion is 1-833-288-EWTN. That's 1-833-288-3986. If you're outside North America, you can dial 1-205-271-2985. You can also text EWTN to 55000. Wait for a response and text your first name and question. Message and data rates may apply. The main line again is 1-833-288-3986. The show is called to communion. All people are called to communion with Christ in the church that he founded, which is the Catholic Church. This show is primarily for non-Catholics, those of you that are not yet in full communion with the Catholic Church, or perhaps you're once practiced the Catholic faith or you're on your way out the door. But if you're not fully card-carrying Catholic, so to speak, we'd like to know why. You can call us and tell us at 1-833-288-EWTN. You might have a theological objection to Catholicism, a personal difficulty, a family struggle. You may be indifferent to the faith. You may just absolutely hate Catholics and think they're awful people. Whatever your reason is for not being Catholic, call us and tell us at 1-833-288-EWTN, 3986. You may be a Catholic and somebody's giving you a hard time about your Catholicism and you'd like to know how to answer them, and if you want to call me and tell me about it, I'll take a stab at it at 1-833-288-3986. I'm David Anders, your host. Our producer today is Michael Birchfield. Our call screener is Matt Gabinski. On social media, we've got Jeff Burson. Normally, I'm accompanied by Tom Price, my co-host and facilitator, but he is headed off to Atlanta, Georgia for the great Eucharistic Congress they have going on there, and EWTN Radio will be present on the ground. Covering the event. You know, a Eucharistic Congress is a celebration of all things Catholic, and especially the sacrament of sacraments, the source and summit of the Christian faith, which is the Blessed Sacrament, the Holy Eucharist. So if you can imagine Mass and adoration and processions and confessions and also a lot of talks and encouraging activities all centered around the presence of Christ in the Eucharist and the presence of Christ in our lives, that's what a Eucharistic Congress is all about. And we've had international congresses called by the Church, going back 100, 150 years or so, and then regional congresses, and the Archdiocese of Atlanta has been hosting one, I think annually for some time. And it's kind of in our backyard here at EWTN, so we're heading over there to enjoy and celebrate and talk about Christ in the Eucharist. So if you're in Atlanta, stop in on the Eucharistic Congress and say hey to Tom. I'll be there tomorrow myself a little bit, so come by the booth and say hello at the EWTN booth, and we'll talk about the faith and Catholic radio. Anyway, the number to be on the show is 1-833-288-EWTN. Have we got time to go to Brandy? Can we go to Brandy? All right, let's go to Brandy in Bethel, Ohio. Brandy, welcome to Call to Communion.
Hello, Father.
I'm actually not a priest. I'm a layman, but but hello anyway.
Okay.
So I'm not Father.
My question is, okay. My question is, over Memorial Day weekend, we were visiting graves, my mother and I, and it became very apparent that her church she joined about 10 years ago, Bible Baptist, is strongly against cremation, science donation, organ donation. I'm a recent convert to the Catholic Church just this past spring, and I don't know how to defend some of our parishioners that have donated their bodies to science, that have been cremated, and I'm wondering what the Church's stance is on that. In RCIA, we touched on it briefly, but if I could have something that I could defend our parishioners with my mother.
Sure. Yeah, thank you. I appreciate the question. So let's distinguish, if we can, organ donation from cremation, because they're two separate cases. Okay, the church has different views on those. When it comes to cremation, actually the church has a preference, and the preference is for Christian burial. All right, Catholics are allowed to cremate their dead, but with certain conditions, and the preference is for Christian burial. And the reason there is that preference embodied in the law and practice of the Catholic tradition is that we believe in the integrity of the human body and the entire person created in the likeness and image of God, and in the doctrine of the resurrection of the body from the dead. And our salvation is not just the salvation of our souls yanked out of bodies, but of the whole person, body and soul, to be redeemed by Christ after the pattern of his resurrection. And for that reason, the church has always even venerated the bodies of the dead as members of Christ. You remember when Christ appears to St. Paul, to Saul on the road to Damascus, he says, Saul, Saul, why are you persecuting me? Because Saul was persecuting the members of Christ, namely Christians. All right, that's how close the identity is between the body of the believer and the body of Jesus. Even back in the Old Testament, we read a passage like 2 Kings 13, and we see that the relics of the dead, like the relics of the prophet Elisha, were effective for miracles in the life of the faithful. So the body participates also in the redemption and has a certain dignity as a bearer of the Imago Dei, the image of God. And so for all these reasons, the church values and prefers cremation, Christian burial. On the other hand, cremation is allowed with certain caveats, certain qualifications. And this, I should add, only since 1983, only since the most recent version of the Code of Canon Law. Prior to that, Catholics could not cremate. Now they're permitted to, and for many people, it's an economic necessity. You know, the burial costs can be significant, can be a very heavy burden on a family to take care of that. They may not have a Catholic cemetery or consecrated ground, and they would prefer to have the remains of their loved ones someplace, some sacred space where they can remember them, pray for their souls, and have them assimilated or associated to some extent to the celebration of the sacrifice of the Mass. And so there are churches today that maintain columbaria where people can respectfully keep the remains of their dead. Now, there are some strictures, some limitations on what Catholics can do with cremated remains. One of them is the church says we cannot cremate if we do so for superstitious reasons. Now, what would that look like? So let's say somebody comes to the priest and says, well, I'd like to have a funeral mass for my mother, and we're planning on cremating and then scattering her ashes on the Ganges. Well, Father would say, I'm sorry, you're not permitted to cremate because you're doing it for a superstitious reason, because you're trying to assimilate Christian burial practices to those of paganism with a completely different view of the human body and of our eternal destiny. And that would be superstitious, and therefore, in such a case, cremation would not be allowable. Another case cremation is not allowable is somebody says, well, all the cousins and aunts were fighting over where, Uncle Bob's remains were going to go, and somebody wanted to bury him here and somebody wanted to bury him there, and so we decided we'd cremate him and split him up. Church says, no, you can't do that. You can't put half of Father Bob on the mantelpiece and, put the other half in the Mississippi River. If you cremate anybody, their remains must be interred and handled respectfully in their integrity, just as you would the physical body has to be treated with dignity and respect. So there are some limits on cremation. Now, why would the church allow it at all if there are these potential dangers and pitfalls that you'd fall into? Well, again, remember, we believe in the resurrection of the body. So whether I'm buried here or there or yonder, at the end of time, when Christ comes back, my body's going to be restored in all its integrity. All right, so it doesn't matter, if I'm an amputee, if I, lose my hair, whatever you might consider a default in the human body, it's all can be rectified in the resurrection anyway. But in the meanwhile, we treat the body with respect. Now, the case of organ donation is a different thing, all right, because with organ donation, I'm actually trying to save a human life. I'm trying to contribute to human well-being. And I'd say that there is a respect and a dignity in donating my organ. I have something of vital necessity, of value, all right, to the human person. And if I elect to use that, to give that as a gift to somebody else, if I give up a kidney, for example, for a loved one, well, that's an act of charity. I mean, that's commendable, right? That's commendable. I'm not doing it out of disrespect for the body or to mutilate myself, but as a sacrifice, as an act of love to care for another human being. So it's a totally different situation. The church allows that. Hey, I appreciate the call, Brandy, very much. I need to go to a break. When we come back, I'll take your calls at 1-833-288-EWTN.
Sharing the fullness of the Catholic faith. 1-833-288-EWTN. 1-833-288-3986. This is Call to Communion with Dr. David Anders on the EWTN Global Catholic Radio Network.
Listen to EWTN Radio day or night. Audio on demand brings you your favorite EWTN programs, prayers, and devotionals instantly to you for free. Visit EWTNapps.com and get started today.
Teresa Tomeo.
It's our goal to help each and every listener take this beautiful faith of ours out into the public square with great ideas on making a difference through engaging the culture.
The leading Catholic voices are on EWTN Radio.
Living the Beatitudes with Father Bjorn.
Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Mother Angelica said that the essence of evangelization is to tell everyone that Jesus loves you. Matt Fradd says that it is one beggar showing another beggar where to find bread. Are we so full of the things of the world that we can't hear or receive the gifts that God is giving to us? In Isaiah, we hear, "The Lord delights in you. I've called you by name. You are mine. You are precious in my eyes, and I love you." Well, we often don't want to hear that, and in the Gospel of Matthew, it hits us over the head even more that we're invited to be part of the kingdom of God. Jesus is king, and he's come to establish his kingdom. The Beatitudes are the 8 roads to God. They lead us with his gifts of the Holy Spirit to become the new person in Christ who will find happiness and bring that happiness to others. Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven.
EWTN. Live truth. Live Catholic.
What's stopping you from becoming a Catholic? You are called to communion with Dr. David Anders. 1-833-288-EWTN. 1-833-288-3986.
Welcome back to Call to Communion. I'm your host, David Anders. The number to be on the show is 1-833-288-3986. I want to draw your attention to a small fact, and that is that I have a book coming out in June. This month, June 21st, will be the release of The Catholic Church Saved My Marriage, Discovering Hidden Grace in the Sacrament of Matrimony by Dr. David Anders, published by EWTN, which takes some of the material from this show, some of the apologetics and theology we talk about on a day-to-day basis, but I think brings it down to earth and shows you why it matters. Why does Catholic theology and Catholic truth matter? Because it has real purchase in a human life. I myself am a convert to the Catholic Church, and discovering the truths of the Catholic faith and the grace of the sacraments had a tremendous transformative impact on my marriage, which was in bad shape before becoming Catholic. If you'd like to read that story, you can check out The Catholic Church Save My Marriage, available from EWTN Religious Catalog, also pre-order on Amazon. Thank you. I want to go now to Joe in Kennewick, Washington. Joe, welcome to Call to Communion.
Thank you, Dr. David Anders. First off, I'd like to say, Doctor, I believe in the future you'll be canonized as a saint.
Well,
and you have my vote or blessing.
That just shows that only the Pope is infallible, because I'll have to disagree with you about that, but I appreciate the compliment.
My question is this. When Jesus was here and he would go to different towns and cities and villages, he was written that he had dispersed many demons and possessed people throughout the area. But I was curious as why don't we have, or do we have, as many possessed people that we don't know about, and or that his dying on the cross reduced the amount of demons that would be plaguing people's lives?
Yeah, great questions, all of them. So let me try to put some perspective on here. First of all, it's kind of curious that you would mention this today, because just this morning, I work for the Catholic Diocese of Birmingham when I'm not on EWTN radio, and I talk to a lot of priests on a regular basis, and I spoke to a priest this morning who was involved in a prayer of exorcism quite recently. And we have this with some regularity, in our diocese and others. There are exorcisms that are performed. Now, you say, well, why don't I hear about them? Well, because they're secret. All right, first of all, they're secret. Exorcists are often targets for persecution and abuse and even assassination, and they typically don't like to publicize that they're exorcists. And if somebody has a problem with a malevolent spirit, a demoniac, they contact their local diocese and they're put in touch with the diocesan exorcist. And but you have to kind of go through channels, right? Because first of all, there are some crazies, a lot of crazies who would like to imagine that they're possessed. Believe it or not, there are people that are attracted to the paranormal as such, and they want to be extraordinary. They want to be noticed. They want to have something miraculous or supernatural to explain their problems, and so they latch on to the diagnosis of demonic possession, and they're really eager to have that vindicated or validated by an authority. And so you have to kind of filter out the crazies from the legitimate cases. And in fact, if you talk to exorcists, they'll tell you that the vast majority of inquiries into the rite of exorcism are spurious. They're not genuine cases of demonic possession, and they have to be. You have to kind of ferret those out and dismiss them. And dioceses will employ sometimes psychologists whose job is to determine, hey, is this a psychological ailment or a physical ailment that could be better treated by a physician, or is this really something that requires the services of an exorcist? So that's one reason you don't hear about them, is because it's really kind of on the down low. And then there are malevolent people who actually target exorcists for abuse and persecution and so forth. So we try not to talk about it publicly and by name, right? That being the case, there are some pretty well-known exorcists identified and known publicly. One who died not too long ago, Father Gabriel Armorth, was the chief exorcist for the Diocese of Rome. He wrote a couple of books. One of them is called An Exorcist Tells His Story. I recommend that for your reading. Another one is by the journalist Matt Baglio, not an exorcist, he's a journalist, but he wrote a book called The Rite, and it was a documentary about his following an American priest through the process of training to become an exorcist, and then a little bit about his ministry as an exorcist. So if you want kind of the inside scoop on how you come up through the ranks as an exorcist and what that actually looks like day to day, take a look at Baglio's book, The Rite, and you'll see that for somebody who's really commissioned in this way, it can be a full-time job. It kind of takes over your whole ministry because there's a lot of work to be done. So now that's the second part of your question was there a change after the death and resurrection of Jesus with respect to the demonic? Well, absolutely, yes, there was, and that's a biblical teaching, right? That St. Paul says that on the cross that Christ defeated the powers and principalities, the rise, death, and resurrection. And so there was a real shift in the supernatural order with respect to Satan's control over the human race. And you can probably liken it to, the D-Day invasion of Normandy, when the Allies really had effectively won the war at that point, but they still had to go, conduct a cleanup operation, right? And so now we're involved in the cleanup operation. Now, there's a lot to clean up. And so the demonic remains a pervasive fact of human experience, and people can open themselves up to malevolent influences and ask for a lot of trouble. Now, if you speak to exorcists today, they will tell you that as the formerly Christian world has lost faith in the gospel and in the church and in the sacraments, people have turned back again to superstition, to the pursuit of the paranormal, to the occult, to New Age philosophies and things like this. And as they turn away from revealed religion towards superstition, there is a marked increase in the amount of demonic activity. Also, gross sin and drug abuse and things like that can open the door to demonic activity. And as the culture has become degraded in that way, priests and exorcists talk about a real rise in the level of demonic activity that they have encountered. I asked a priest of our diocese, who was ordained just a few years ago, pretty recently, but he's an older fellow and not given to flights of fancy or fantastical thinking, very level-headed, feet on the ground kind of guy. I said, Father, what was the biggest surprise to you in becoming a priest? After you were a priest, what did you experience that you had not expected to experience? And his answer shocked me. Well, he had two answers. One did not shock me, and one did. First thing he said was how much good people derive from confession. He says, I always knew confession was beneficial, but my appreciation for the sacrament grew deeply once I was the one administering it, conveying absolution rather than receiving. He says, the other thing that shocked me was the amount of demonic activity that I encountered. And I said, are you talking about demonic activity that has required consulting with the diocesan exorcist, that kind of, he said, oh yeah, absolutely. He says, I see it all the time, And I have, I've dealt with priests in my diocese who, in their own catechesis, especially in RCIA preparation, in adult faith formation, really spend a lot of time working on the First Commandment and sins of superstition against the First Commandment because of all the malevolent influences that they've seen. And now throughout history, of course, there's been a heavy emphasis on this ministry as part of the church's witness, and Christ, of course, was an exorcist. He commissioned exorcists. He gave the apostles a command to cast out demons. And there's an interesting book by Ramsey McMullen, who's a secular historian. As far as I know, Professor McMullen's not a Catholic. The title of his book is Christianizing the Roman Empire. I think it's published by Yale University Press, so we're not talking about some fly-by-night publisher here. And Professor McMullen argues that one of the reasons that so many people in antiquity joined the church, he says, not because of the appeal of the message. Many of them hadn't heard the message, all right? They didn't have means of social communication. They didn't have radio, television. They didn't have EWTN, but he said they witnessed Christian exorcisms, displays of supernatural power. And there's pretty good documentary evidence for that. And he says that's the strongest explanation for the vast numbers of people that came in the church in the 2nd, 3rd, 4th century, even before Constantine. Now I think since the modern period, especially middle of the 20th century, there were Catholic bishops and priests who began to underemphasize in their own ministries the element of the supernatural, confrontation with the forces of evil, the malevolent spirits, and so forth. And even those who lost faith in the rite of exorcism, even though it's a standard part of the church's liturgy, they quit practicing it and quit emphasizing it. And so you're going to see less of a practice if the people who are charged with performing it don't have a lot of confidence in it. That's something that Father Armorth draws out in his book. He admonishes priests and bishops to take seriously their role as exorcists and bemoaned himself that there weren't more people given to this ministry given its importance. But I think in the last 15 years or so, there's been a renewed interest, even at the Vatican and throughout dioceses around the world, in the importance of this ministry, especially as the church is growing most in the developing world and in places that previously had a well-ensconced pagan culture or culture of witchcraft. The need to confront the demonic is ever more present in the minds of pastoral leaders. And, I know that when I've talked to some of my priest friends from West Africa, they tell me frequently about their need to confront witchcraft and sorcery as traditional practices that draw people away from the faith and away from a healthy spirituality. So I hope that's a nuanced and rich enough answer for you. And again, for more information, take a look at Father Armorth's book or Baglio's book, The Rite, or even read Ramsey McMullen's Christianizing the Roman Empire. Thanks, Joe. Appreciate the call. The number to be on Call to Communion is 1-833-288-3986. 1-833-288-3986. Let's go now to, we got Barb next? Is that right? Or are we? Oh, I'm sorry, Jeff. Jeff in Fort Wayne, Indiana. Jeff, welcome to Call to Communion.
Oh, hi, Doc.
Hey, Jeff.
I have a friend whose father was in seminary for a couple of years, and then after Vatican II, he left the church because he just couldn't believe all the changes. So, and my understanding is there's a lot of people like that, and I'm just curious what the changes were that caused a lot of people to leave the church.
Sure. Well, I think it's more complex. I'm not a big believer in monocausational explanation, putting my finger on the one silver bullet that can explain everything. I think there are a lot of reasons that the church had a kind of membership implosion, if you will, after the time of the Second Vatican Council. But I think a lot of the dynamics were already in place before the council, embedded culturally, socially, ideologically. So let's take the case of the United States particularly, which is the one I know best. And it's different in different countries, different gathered cultures. So, American Catholics had long had the experience of being outsiders to the American experience. And in my home of Birmingham, Alabama, in fact, Catholics were persecuted and put to death. We have a priest from our diocese attached to the cathedral right across from where I work, named Father Pat Coyle. And Father Coyle was shot dead in broad daylight in front of witnesses about 100 years ago because he performed an interracial marriage. And the woman involved in the marriage was a convert to the faith, and her father was a Methodist minister who neither wanted her to be Catholic nor wanted her to marry a Puerto Rican. That was who she was marrying. So he took a gun, shot the priest dead in broad daylight, and then subsequently was acquitted, even though he did so in front of witnesses, because the jury was consisted of Klansmen who were as anti-Catholic as they were anti-racial minority. And we had a cemetery in West Blockton, Alabama, where Catholics buried their dead because they weren't permitted to bury their dead in the public cemetery or to send their children to public schools. So, a lot of persecution, animosity towards Catholics. Even, it didn't matter if you were on the right or the left, there was a pervasive sense that Catholics were superstitious, backward, Southern Europeans that were slavishly obedient to the Pope, and that was inconsistent with American democracy. I'll have to come back to this call on the other side of the break, and I'll take up that theme again.
I'm Jeanette DeMello, Editor-in-Chief of the National Catholic Register and co-host of Register Radio with Matthew Bunson. Join us every week as we talk with the Register's expert writers and editors about the news you need to know and offer authentic Catholic insights on the important stories that impact your life. Register Radio, every Saturday at 7 p.m. Eastern and Sunday at 11 a.m. Eastern, here on EWTN Global Catholic Radio.
I went paddleboarding with my family recently. It took forever to get there. The AC stopped working in my van. I couldn't find parking. The paddleboard pump broke. By the time we were ready to have family fun, I was ready to explode on everyone. I was miserable. Now, if I may examine my conscience on radio with you, everything I just complained about is the problem of a blessed person. I have a car, paddleboards, kids, and I'm at a safe state park in the story. I was frustrated because I was trying to manage my blessings. So often, that's exactly what frustrates us. We got to get the kids to school, make their lunches, run off to work. Stop, think, thank. You have kids, food, and a job, all blessings. But if you don't get intentional about counting them as blessings, you'll end up miserable and cranky. We need to stop and pause and take stock of what's actually going on and give thanks often. Then we can have perspective and joy even in the midst of the chaos. This is Chris Stefanik from RealLifeCatholic.com on EWTN Radio.
EWTN, communicating the faith.
I feel that God has been really doing a work in me in the last 5-10 years. I'm a convert to Catholicism, and I started to just really feel a passion to know more about the Catholic faith, and I started listening to Catholic radio all day. I'm not doing great things, but I'm doing small things with great love.
EWTN. Live truth. Live Catholic.
Hi, this is Cy Kellett. Later today on Catholic Answers Live, our super fun Friday lineup includes weird questions with Jimmy Akin and not so weird questions for Dr. Carrie Gress. Catholic Answers Live, 6 p.m. Eastern on most of these EWTN radio stations. And now, back to Call to Communion with Dr. David Anders.
What's stopping you from becoming a Catholic? You are called to communion with Dr. David Anders. 1-833-288-EWTN. 1-833-288-3986.
Welcome back to Call to Communion. The number to be on the show is 1-833-288-3986. Before the break, we were talking to Jeff in Fort Wayne, Indiana. He was asking about why people left the church after the Second Vatican Council. What was it that changed that led to such an eventuality? And I was making the argument that I don't think you can just pin the problem on the Second Vatican Council or on changes in church practice. I think that's kind of monocausational. I'm a bit narrow-minded. I think you have to look at the whole picture of church and society in the 20th century. And I was starting with a consideration of the place of Catholics in American culture in the early part of the 20th century, when Catholics were, in many places, like my own home state of Alabama, a genuinely persecuted minority. And even in more traditionally Catholic parts of the country, there was a real sense that the wider culture excluded Catholics from their conception of American life, and there were diatribes against Catholicism from the left and the right, considering them to be un-American. And so there was a real urge on the part of Catholics to assimilate to American civilization and to be counted as genuine American citizens. That's been something that's kind of been in the American Catholic imagination for a long time. Another factor was, and this I think everybody can agree to, there was a regrettable culture of authoritarianism that many experienced in the early 20th century Catholic Church in America and elsewhere. And it's associated with the sin of clericalism, right, which is something the church preaches and teaches against. The idea that the church is just the clergy, and sometimes caricatured in the phrase pay, pray, and obey. And that's the kind of a tendency to say Father knows best and can do no wrong. And so if you experience something at the hands of a priest or a religious and you think it's a bit off base, feeling intimidated about bringing that to light. And we saw what kind of trouble that's gotten the church into now in the 21st century. I just read Archdiocese, I think, of Minneapolis is, paying out some pretty big settlements for abuse that was perpetrated by priests. And a lot of that abuse was, decades and decades old, but could be furthered, perpetrated, facilitated by a kind of culture of clericalism. And so a real suspicion, at least on the part of some, towards what they viewed as an incalcitrant and intolerant or authoritarian hierarchy. And then finally, I think the social question that emerged at the end of the mid 19th and late 19th century, and concern for social welfare, and a desire to articulate the gospel in a way that would be broadly applicable to a whole host of social needs, bore a lot of positive fruit in Catholic theological reflection and created a lot of interest in new apostolates. And I think about Dorothy Day as an American kind of exemplar of how can I live my Catholic faith in a socially responsible way and reach out on behalf of the poor. And there were movements to reinvigorate Catholic theology with a renewed attention to Scripture and to the patristic tradition. And there was a theological school called the Nouvelle Théologie associated with names like Henri de Lubac, whose magnificent book Catholicism fostered so much deep theological reflection. This school of thought influenced even those like Pope Benedict or Cardinal Ratzinger, and came into play in the documents of the Second Vatican Council. Pope Pius XII initiated a reform of the liturgy that predated the council, and so there was a real kind of a sense of effervescence and enthusiasm about change and the necessity to maybe break out of some ways of doing things that have been counterproductive, and all of that predates the Second Vatican Council and feeds into it to a certain extent. And there was also an important social development that affected everybody in the country, and that was the Second World War. And in response to anti-Catholicism, Congress passed some, rather as reflective of anti-Catholicism, Congress passed some laws restricting Catholic immigration into the United States. And so the influx of new Catholics was slowed to a trickle, but the existing Catholic populations continued to grow through procreation, and the grandchildren of Catholic immigrants from Italy and Ireland and Lithuania and Poland and places like this began to become more culturally American and move from the ghettos of the inner cities into the suburbs. And this was facilitated by the war, the GI Bill, and the professionalization of the American economy. So where, your great-grandfather's Catholicism or your grandfather's Catholicism might have been kind of the Catholicism of the working class labor union poor of New Haven, for example, the children and grandchildren's generation would be your doctors and your lawyers and your entrepreneurs who had moved from those urban ghettos out into the suburbs. And about that time, you remember when John F. Kennedy ran for president, and he gave that great speech that famous speech to the Houston Ministerial Association, when he effectively said, hey, my Catholicism is a private matter and it won't have any bearing on my public life as president. Well, that might have been a politically astute thing to say. It was not good Catholic theology, all right? But it was appealing, was necessary perhaps, in one sense, politically, for him to say that to the Protestant ministers, for them to give him their vote. But it was also, even though it wasn't good Catholic theology, because our Catholic faith should impinge on everything that we do, it was also, to a certain extent, a message that Catholics themselves were eager to hear. They wanted to know that they could bracket off their Catholicism from their American experience and be accepted by the rest of the culture as good Americans, and that their Catholicism could be something they kept private. Again, that's not an attitude that the Church endorses, but it is one that many Catholics took. And so in that cultural moment of social and economic and ideological change, both within and without of the Church, that's when the Second Vatican Council was called, and the work of the Council, I think, was quite beautiful. I've read the Council documents, and I've spoken to people who were, even at work in the Vatican or very close to it at that time, and a lot of good fruit came out of it. But the writing of a text and its reception are two different things. And so in the United States in particular, there was a tendency to take what has sometimes been pejoratively called the spirit of Vatican II, which is to say, hey, there's this sense of everything's new and changing. Never mind what the documents say. I'm going to interpret this how I want it to be interpreted. And so there were a lot of people in the Church who took the fact of the Council as an excuse to implement whatever private theological fancy or fetish they wanted to bring about in their own church was. And so on the part of many lay people, there was a confusion about what the Council had or had not said, what the Church did or did not teach. And some people were subject to what I would consider a real catechetical abuse, a failure to teach the truths of the faith, the catechism, the moral law, and a kind of loosey-goosey approach to pastoral ministry that left many people hungering for a sense of the transcendent and the permanent and the real. All right, and of course, a lot of people did not leave the Church. A lot of people remained faithful to the Church, but some in that time of confusion. And of course, it was a confusion that wasn't unique to Catholicism. It kind of pervaded the whole culture of the 1960s, and a real sense of revolution in the times they are a-changing. And so it wasn't just Catholicism, but the Western tradition, Christianity, and other traditional institutions suffered a real crisis of confidence on the part of the culture. And again, if you look at the demographics, the Catholic Church has lost a lot of people. A lot of people have left the Church. We're not the only religious community that's suffered that fate. Mainline Protestantism has similarly been afflicted. Now, interestingly, one of the communities that has resisted some of that demographic implosion is the evangelical community. And I think some of the reasons are that while Catholics were trying so eagerly to assimilate to American culture, which I think may have been a mistake, evangelicalism was born in the 20th century by being kicked out of their denominations in mainline Protestantism, and they were fleeing to those suburbs and setting up their Bible college and their radio stations and things like that, and eagerly scooping up those Catholics that were kind of losing touch with their own tradition. And so it's kind of the opposite end of the spectrum, and they were setting up more of a countercultural stance, all right, rather than trying to assimilate. And the Church calls us to neither of those positions. It doesn't say you should assimilate to the wider culture. It doesn't say you should cut yourself off from the wider culture. It says you should be salt and light, right? That we live in this world, we're not of this world. And the Church can't be assimilated to any ideological program, all right, but through genuine devotion to Christ and living our faith generously through the liturgy, we can embed any part of the culture with the truth of the gospel. And I think today, the call that Pope Francis has made and the U.S. bishops have made for missionary discipleship, and I understand missionary discipleship to be witnessing to Christ and mission out of the depth of your own personal relationship to Jesus in the liturgy, all right, rather than relying on bureaucratic structures or programs or the way things have always been, all right, that sense of the priority of Christ, of relationship with Him in the Catholic Church and her sacraments, that's the path forward, that's the pastoral vision that we need for renewal in the Church and in the world, in my humble opinion. Anyway, thanks, Jeff. I really appreciate the call. The number to be on Call to Communion is 1-833-288-3986, 1-833-288-3986. Now I want to go to Barb in Cincinnati, Ohio. Barb, welcome to Call to Communion.
Oh, hi. Thank you, Dr. David Anders.
You're so welcome.
I'm looking forward to your book because I believe, too, that the Catholic Church saved my marriage
Praise
as well.
God. Praise God.
I have a piggyback question on the first caller. I have a brother who, was raised Catholic, and he is bound and determined to donate his entire body to science. So what does the Catholic Church say about that?
Yeah, thanks. So the Church says that it is permissible to donate one's body to science. Pope John Paul II made a point of this. The U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops has also acknowledged this. Pope Pius XII. Don't have a Paul XII. Pius XII said the same thing. So it's allowable. Now there are a few caveats we want to take into consideration. So one of them is that if a person does donate their body to science, they need to make provision in the donation that when the use of that body for scientific purposes has been concluded, that the body should be returned to the family for proper Christian burial or cremation. All right, because again, we regard the body with dignity. It's not just a tool, to keep in a drawer and pull out whenever we need it. All right, it can be used for a specific purpose, scientific exploration or study, but then it should be properly buried at the appropriate time. Another consideration would be if I make provision to have my body donated to science, I should not neglect to have the memorial mass and Holy Sacrifice of Mass, funeral mass celebrated for the repose of my soul, the repose of the soul of my loved one. So you don't want to leave off the proper funeral rites, even if you don't have the Christian burial at that time. Another consideration would be you don't want to donate your body to science if you have reason to believe that the scientific investigation will go down a path that the Church would not approve. So, for instance, if researchers were planning on harvesting sex cells for purposes of illicit forms of human procreation, that would be disallowed. And then finally, it'd be a good idea to consult the desires of one's family. Catholic Church teaches that I become one flesh with my wife, and my body is not my own; it belongs to her. All right. Now, obviously, that ends with death, and that when I die, I'm no longer married. But still, care for the remains of one's loved ones is very important to many people. I've had this conversation with my own wife, and we've gone back and forth because, on the one hand, we understand that the Church has a preference for Christian burial. I do. I understand that very well. And I said, if you predecease me, it would mean an awful lot to me to be able to have a Christian burial and have you properly buried. And she says, I understand that, and I sure wish I could be buried right next to our church. Unfortunately, our church doesn't have a cemetery plot, but it does have a columbarium. And in her mind, she loves the idea of being in the columbarium so that her family could remember her and visit her remains when they go to Mass, and remember to offer the Holy Sacrifice of the Mass on her behalf. I understand both those priorities, and you know what we're going to do? We're going to negotiate those differences, and we're going to figure out pastorally what's the best move for our family. And so I think bringing into consideration the family's concerns is also valid. But in principle, is it allowable to donate your body to science? It is. I appreciate the call. Thank you so much. Oh, my producer has given me the heads up telling me that I need to advertise the EWTN app. Carry EWTN with you everywhere when you download the EWTN app. You can enjoy EWTN Live, TV and radio streams, audio and video on demand, EWTN news, program schedules, prayers, devotionals, and more. Download the EWTN app at EWTNapps.com. The number to be on the show, again, is 1-833-288-3986. I'm going to go now to Emma. We got Emma up? Emma, driving through Nebraska. Emma, welcome to Call to Communion.
Hi, Dr. Anders. First of all, I just want to say thank you so much. I'm a new Catholic. I just converted this Easter, and I've learned a lot from your show. So
Thank you so much. I'm so glad to hear that. I appreciate you telling me.
My question, I was raised Lutheran. My father was actually a Lutheran minister. And my brother, he married an evangelical free, I guess that's EV free. They believe in, they don't believe in infant baptism.
Yep.
And So my question is, did a lot of, they...
Oh, Emma, you're fading out on me. You're fading out. You're fading out. Have we lost Emma? Emma. Driving through Nebraska. Well, we lost Emma. So, Emma, call us back, okay? I know we had a question about your relative who married someone from the Evangelical Free movement. You know, I know a good bit about the EV Free Church because I went to Trinity Evangelical Divinity School before I was Catholic, and that, of course, is the flagship seminary for EV Free. And I think we were going to discuss their views on baptism, but we lost the call. So please call back and I'd be happy to talk about it. Let me go now to Helen. Helen is in Houston, Texas. Helen, welcome to Call to Communion. Hello, Helen.
Hello, Dr.
Hi,
Yes.
what can I do for you?
Hello. I'm calling in regards to my daughter. She's 16, just finished her 11th grade year, and she's been preparing for confirmation for 2 years, and her confirmation is later on tonight. Everything's been going well, I thought, as far as her preparations, and I felt like she was ready. But last night she kind of had a little breakdown, I guess, and revealed to me a lot of doubts and insecurities that she has about the faith. She's not doubting whether or not she wants to be confirmed. She definitely wants to, but she has, questions that she feels have not been answered as far as, is God real? If he's real, and I pray to him, and I'm trying, and I'm going through this journey of preparation for 2 years. Why hasn't he revealed himself to me? And she was just really upset, and it just made me feel really, really bad because, I didn't, I guess ideally want her to be going in with those type of feelings.
Yeah, thanks. I really appreciate it. Let me put your mind at ease and hopefully put her mind at ease as well. So the act of faith does not require that we feel anything at all, and it is perfectly compatible with feelings that are utterly at odds with the intellectual conviction that these things are true. All right, and some people experience the sacraments with great emotion and passion, and some people don't. And I myself, I believe myself to be a pretty convicted Catholic, and I believe what the Church teaches very strongly. But when I first received Holy Communion as an adult, I was aware of absolutely nothing in the emotional realm. All right, lights didn't go off, bombs didn't explode in my head. The only thing that really struck me was a realization, theologically speaking, that this was the sacrament of Catholic unity and the sort of the final stage in Catholic initiation, and that by receiving the Holy Communion, I really was a card-carrying Catholic. But that wasn't what you would call a mystical experience at all. It was just a sort of intellectual realization that, yep, I've signed on the dotted line now. All right, of course, that was emotional, but for different reasons and in different ways. The experience of faith is compatible with an experience of great desolation emotionally. We shouldn't expect that faith necessarily is accompanied by lightness of heart or ebullience or excitement, and I think that Jesus Christ is a paradigm example for this. Jesus, in anticipating the pains of the cross, was so stressed out that he experienced hematidrosis, the sweating of blood, which is a genuine physiological phenomenon that can happen under conditions of extreme stress. And, of course, his prayer was, help, not me. Take this away. May this cup pass from me, Lord, but not mine, but thy will be done. So it's not like he had this experience of quietude and perfect equanimity in the face of imminent suffering. His experience was one of psychological anguish. And many of the saints have written about the depths of the spiritual life are often accompanied precisely by these kinds of experiences of desolation. As I'm sure you know, Mother Teresa of Calcutta, Saint Mother Teresa of Calcutta, tremendous saint who had a powerful mystical experience early in her life, calling her to the slums of India, and then never had another one, and operated most of her life in a condition of we might say not blindness, but a kind of darkness, where emotional darkness, where she felt sort of devoid of spiritual energy, and yet she plowed forth in obedience to the divine command that had been laid upon her without any sort of consolation interiorly in that vocation. Now, who would say of Mother Teresa that she lacked faith or that her life was unfruitful? On the contrary, few people have done more to witness to the truth of the faith and love of Christ, even though she did so in an experience of emotional desolation. Cardinal Newman once said that to have 1,000 difficulties is not to have one doubt, and it is entirely possible to make an act of faith and divine revelation and yet be just subsumed under a host of intellectual difficulties. And of course, that can be the work of a lifetime to fix those. All right, and I think the faith is best understood, analogized to marriage. You know, when a couple gets married, it is not necessary, it may be desirable, but it's not necessary for that couple to have any powerful emotion, positive or negative, in order to affect the validity of the marriage. What's necessary is the pledge of fidelity. I will be with you until I die, period, end of paragraph, right? And sometimes, you know, there are cultures like India, for instance, where, you know, spouses may not even know each other until the day of the wedding. So they don't have all these powerful emotions of romanticism. They have a kind of a steadied, sober realization that this is what I need to do, all right? And then they're propelled by that pledge of fidelity. And I think that you know, working out the problems and the difficulties can be the work of a lifetime. So I think if your daughter's expectation is that because she's fasted or prayed or studied, that she's going to have some sort of intuitive grasp of the answer to all of her questions, some kind of mystical encounter with God, I think that's the wrong way of thinking about it. And in fact, perhaps her very experience of desolation and difficulty is in fact God speaking to her, but in a way that she did not anticipate, right? Maybe, you remember when God spoke to Ananias and told him to go baptize Saul, who became St. Paul. Ananias talks back to God. He says, God, I know this guy. He's a bad guy. And God answers Ananias and says, you know, go and baptize him, make him a Catholic, and I will show him how much he must suffer for my name. Right? I'm going to show him how much he must suffer for my name. And the call of Christian discipleship is that we take up the cross and follow Jesus, right? Not that we be resolved of all problems or conflicts. I'd love to talk to your daughter about her specific intellectual difficulties with the faith, and I'd maybe help her think through a way to confront those and think about them. But you said she has the desire to receive the sacrament. That right there, that desire, devoid of emotional fireworks, right, rife with difficulty, perhaps that right there is precisely what God wants her to know. Right? There are decisions I can make in life that I know is the right thing to do, even though I feel nothing but confusion and difficulty. Marriage is going to be like that for her if she gets married. There are going to be days that she wakes up and says, why the heck did I get myself into this thing? Who is this guy I'm married to? He's not the guy I thought he was. You know, but it's the right thing to do, and I'm going to plow forward and find a path. Right? That's endemic to all of Christian life. So I do want to give you a resource for her when she's thinking about the intellectual questions. Professor Peter Kreeft, Dr. Peter Kreeft, has a book written specifically for teenagers around the age of confirmation entitled Because God is Real. Because God is Real. And it's a helpful little introduction to how to think about some of these difficult questions that kids come up against. Hey, the show is Called to Communion, Monday through Friday on the EWTN Global Radio Network, answering your questions about the Catholic faith and inviting you to consider full communion with Christ in the church that he founded, the Catholic Church. If you're interested, come meet us this weekend at the Eucharistic Congress in Atlanta, where EWTN will have a table. And also check out my new book, The Catholic Church Saved My Marriage, Catholic Church Saved My Marriage, available at the EWTN Religious Catalog and Amazon.com. Catholic Church Saved My Marriage by Dr. David Anders. Anyway, we'll see you next week. Please pray for us that we have a safe weekend and get to and from Atlanta. And in the meanwhile, pray for us. We'll pray for you. Thank you very much.